It is the belief that we can evolve beyond nature, fusing technology with mankind. Is the future transhuman, or are we cyborgs already? This is Roundtable with me, David Foster. As humans, we've barely changed in 100,000 years, but the technology that we have created constantly evolves. The transhumanists among us might say we are in danger of becoming the weakest link, and to keep up, we need to find ways to merge ourselves with the artificial. To an extent, we are doing that already with pacemakers, hearing aids, and other such devices, but the enhanced human of the future could be on another level altogether.
Everything you do or learn will be imprinted on this disc.
Part man, part machine. It may have its origins in science fiction, but human enhancement is already a part of us.
Everything you do or learn.
In the machines that enable us to hear better, keep our hearts pumping, and move our bodies when we no longer can. The possibilities for human enhancement are endless. But where do we draw the line? When does a human become a robot? And what does it mean for the future of humanity?
To some degree, we are already a cyborg.
The result may be the end of humanity.
With a microchip embedded in his brain, Ian Burkhardt became the first quadriplegic to move his hand through the power of thought. A moment described as science fiction come true, as his brain used a computer to communicate with his muscles. And with it came the beginning of a new bionic era. But what would happen if this technology was to become mainstream outside the medical world? Transhumanism is the belief that the human race can evolve beyond its physical and mental limitations through technology. The ideas existed for decades, but as the science accelerates, the parameters of the human condition could be changed forever. And the idea is becoming more popular.
To some degree, we are already a cyborg. You think of like the digital tools that you have, your phone, your computer, the applications that you have. Over time, I think we'll probably see a closer merger of biological intelligence and digital intelligence.
Billionaire Elon Musk is backing a company trying to create a direct link between our brain and our technology. But will such advances lead to tech-based inequality?
We see this merger of the biological sciences with computer science. The result, however, may not be the upgrading of humans into gods. The result may be the end of humanity. It's a distinct possibility that in the 21st century, most humans will therefore find themselves in a new category, in a new class.
But what would a cyborg future look like if a new group of superhumans emerged who would control them? In the wrong hands, cyborg technology could be exploited by unscrupulous corporations and governments. And as man and machine come closer, perhaps the biggest question for humanity will be who controls whom. Well, from a simple life improvement to a new race of higher beings, human enhancement is full of possibilities and potential pitfalls. Here at today's Roundtable to talk about this and presumably a great deal more, Professor Kevin Warwick, cybernetics specialist, also had an implant, a chip in his arm, sometimes known as Captain Cyborg. He's been experimenting with human enhancement technologies since 1998. 8. Alex Pearlman, to my left, journalist and bioethicist who herself had a magnetic implant under her skin. Didn't quite work. We'll talk about that, Alex, in a bit. New York. And Professor Massimo Pigliucci, a professor of philosophy at City College in New York. His research deals with the relationship between science and philosophy. And to Spain, Barcelona, Neil Harbisson, who's officially been recognised by the British government as the first human cyborg. He's a contemporary artist and activist. Welcome to you all. Neil, in Barcelona, first of all, for those people who don't know your story, you have an antenna on your head which allows you to do what?
It allows me to extend my perception of color beyond the visual spectrum, so it picks up infrared to ultraviolet, and I receive these frequencies in my skull as vibrations that become inner sounds. There's also internet connections, so people can send colors to my head from other parts of the world, or I can also connect to satellites that send colors.
Now, Professor Warwick, sitting here in the studio, you had an implant in your arm. It was able to send signals to a robotic hand. I don't think you have it anymore.
No, it was the same implant that was used for the paralysed person that we saw earlier. But for me, I didn't have a paralysis, so it was a scientific experiment. But it was to link my nervous system with the internet, with a computer. The advantage of your nervous system is that you can deal with motor and sensory signals on the peripheral nerves, whereas, as we saw for the paralysed individual earlier, the implant's in the motor cortex, so it just deals with signals for movement.
Your plan is to have one put in your brain, or two in your brain, so you can communicate with somebody else.
Yeah, well, with that experiment, my wife also had electrodes in her nervous system, and we did a form of telegraphic communication between our nervous system. So when she closed her hand, my brain received a pulse. And I believe firmly that that technology can be used brain to brain to bring about a new form of communication, a sort of telepathy, but for real, technologically.
Do you have any issues with this, Alex? Do you think it's going too far?
I don't. I actually think that the experimentation that Kevin does is absolutely necessary. And I think that from a scientific perspective, and especially from an ethical one, doing those kinds of experiments in safe and controlled environments and then being transparent about what he's doing is absolutely the right way to do it. And saying that it's wrong or immoral in any way, I think, you know, sort of ignores the fact that it's going to happen anyway. And I think that instead of asking whether it should be done, we should be seeing how we are doing it and looking more closely at the methods.
There is an ethical side to this, and we'll bring in Massimo, who applies the philosophical side of this to some of the science, and say, in that story that we played out, we had somebody saying this will not be an upgrading of humanity. In fact, it could be the end of humanity if it goes too far.
I would agree in principle that if we want to do experiments of this kind, absolutely, they ought to be done in a controlled environment and in the most scientific way possible. That's for sure. I don't quite buy, however, the idea that these things are going to happen anyway, as if they had a mind of their own. I mean, this is technology. Technology is the result of human decisions. And so it's not going to happen anyway. It's going to happen if we want to happen it, and it's going to happen the way we want to happen it. For instance, we can imagine regulate these kind of technologies just like we regulate any other kind of technology. So we need to be careful sort of in taking for granted the idea that these things are going to happen regardless. You know, they're not independent.
Well, let's kick that one over to Neil in Barcelona. This is not something we need to do. It's something that we're almost having fun doing. And inherent in that is a certain danger.
Dangers, yes. There might be dangers, but there's a danger whenever you cross a line of security. And yes, it might be dangerous to merge with technology, but it's a risk that many people are willing to take, in the same way that if you climb the Everest, there is a risk. If you insert chips in your body, there might be a risk as well.
Yeah, well, I think two things. One, my job is to do research. And research is to look outside the box and try and find new ways, in this case, of interacting with technology. And I think that the other point I'd like to make is that there's not really a firm line between therapy and enhancement. We saw earlier a paralyzed individual benefiting from the technology, but a lot of that technology can be used for enhancement. You know, should it only be used on somebody who has some problem? Well, that's crazy in a way. Some of the experiments I did involved looking at ultrasonic input, and Neil has got an infrared sense to some extent. This is technology that could be helpful. Ultrasonics gives a good sense of distance. So it could be helpful for somebody who's blind, so for therapeutic purposes. But then, you know, you could have an ultrasonic sense. That gives you an extra sense. So it's using the same technology. The experiments are both for therapy and enhancement, and to say, well, you can't do this for its enhancement, but you can do it for therapy, it's crazy.
I agree with you, and I actually believe that the traditional view of the sort of academy is that there is a line between therapy and enhancement and that it shouldn't be crossed. It's my view that there's only a line now because we say that there is. And that the way that technology has advanced so rapidly, and especially in this sector as we're discussing it, where it's being used by innovative scientists and individuals and entrepreneurs to enhance themselves, whether it's their senses or, you know, other aspects of their lives, I don't think that we can say that the line exists, that one side of it is wrong and the other side of it isn't.
But you can go into the realm of eugenics, can't you, where people create superhumans for their own benefit and everybody else becomes a substandard human being.
Well,
I mean,
that could be where we're heading. That could be where we're heading.
But it's...
Yeah, but I mean, you could say with cell phones, they give people the ability that other people don't have, who don't have. So, I mean, it is stretching society, like society's like an elastic band, and you stretch it and stretch it. It gives some people more abilities. The question here is, are we going even further with this and creating some form of superhumans?
So, Neil Harbisson, I mean, I've seen a talk you've given in which you talk about explore the possibilities of technology, human enhancement technology. How far do you see it going?
Well, I think first of all, we should have the freedom to design ourselves and decide what senses and organs we want to have as a species. And I think this is something that we will see happening in the next decades. There will be more freedom to decide what senses and organs you want to have. And I think that's necessary. We as a species have been changing the planet for thousands of years in order to survive. And I think this century we'll see it differently. We'll start changing ourselves in order to survive. Well, I think that's the right path.
In an incredible way, because you were telling me just before we came on air that you are about to found the Trans Species Society. Now, I'm not sure whether that would turn us all into wolves or birds, but it would give us, in your idea, the ability to use some of the senses that they have that we don't have.
Exactly, yes. I think one of the most important ones would be night vision. Instead of creating artificial light, I think we as a species should have created night vision. This would mean cities would be dark. We wouldn't be using artificial light, so that would be better for our planet. And many of the senses that other species have, we can already mimic by merging with technology. And that's, I think, what we'll start seeing, the addition of senses and organs that already exist in nature that will help us survive in this planet and also in space in the future.
You see, Alex, it occurs to me that there's a problem here, is that there are, and you alluded to it, there are going to be those people who can afford to do this,
yes,
who can afford to change themselves into whatever they want to be, and there are going to be those of us who can't and have to muddle along as sort of, well, a different species in many ways.
Exactly, and especially those workers you can imagine who, you know, possibly maybe they only work at night, maybe they're long-haul truckers, and then they're going to be, you know, forced to try to afford these kinds of enhancements that, if not regulated properly, or if they're not accessible to everyone, that's going to put a damper and a hardship on certain people, whereas others might use it just to have fun, right? They might not need it, and you know, the Yuval Harari alluded to the difference in classes and types of people that this kind of technology might create. And I think that that's a very big question that needs to be discussed.
Is there a problem? Kevin Warwick?
I don't see it this time. I mean, I agree completely with Neil that we can take on new sensory input, but I think there are some enormous game changers on the table. One of them, I believe firmly, that you could take this as a hypothesis, scientific hypothesis, that if we link human brains together, we'll be able to communicate in a whole new way in terms of emotions, feelings, a much richer form, and that's what brain cells like to do. I think also linking human brains with artificial intelligence gives us the ability to start thinking in more dimensions. The human brain thinks in 3D, which limits, when you think of space travel, we've hardly been anywhere because we're thinking three-dimensionally. If we can start thinking in more dimensions, maybe we can start traveling for. So I think there are some distinct things. Neil's sensory things, yes, it's on the table, you can see you can do it, but then new forms of communication and new means of understanding completely change.
But I think that what you're describing, and what, by all means, is certainly possible. I think that that's such a futurist hypothetical that we're not there yet. And what you're describing about brains communicating in more dimensions, that sounds amazing, you know, maybe 20, 50 years down the line, but what we're actually being faced with in the next 5 to 10 years is what could possibly distinguish the haves and the have-nots. And I think that, especially me coming from a background in the United States where the healthcare system is such that there is a division between the haves and the have-nots and who has access to technology for enhancements and therapies, I think that this could become a very real issue quite soon, and much sooner than, for example, multiple dimensional thought.
On a practical level, we're talking about putting mechanical devices into people at the moment. But I'm wondering if there's going to be a time, because I've seen some of the experiments that you've done where you've grown tissue.
Oh, yeah.
But whether you're going to be able to put something into yourself, me, Alex, or any of the other people here, that I would be able to pass on to my children as effectively as an evolutionary gain, or is it just going to stay with me?
No, I mean, it's a big question. Evolution, is it more the Darwinian thing? You can't, any habits or things you do, you can't pass on. It's not going to affect your genes. Or is it more Lamarckian, where things that you do can affect your genetic makeup and you can pass those things on? I think clearly if it's Lamarckian, then it's going to change dramatically, very, very quickly, over just a few generations. Having implants, our grandchildren even, and certainly our great-grandchildren, will have abilities way beyond what we can dream of because their brains will be tuned in. If it's more the Darwinian way, which I'm not so sure about, I know they'll kill me in Cambridge for saying that, but I'm not so sure about it, then it will be slower.
They are using this, aren't they, the American military? We've seen so many advances from the military around the world. As we go to our guest in New York and Barcelona again. Neil, let me bring you in on this one first of all. They are using this to make the super soldier. Barack Obama said, let's build Iron Man, and it's not that far off, is it?
I think soldiers want to do the opposite. They want to separate themselves from the tool as much as possible. So I see more a direction of drones where soldiers stay in their country and they just send drones. They won't merge with technology, I think. I think most military groups will see how they try to go the least possible to the field where the war is. So I think it's the opposite, to separate as much as possible the soldier from...
Although there are those out there saying, imagine a soldier, this is from an article I read today, who never needs to sleep, requires minimal sustenance, or who has cat-like infrared vision. They are working on that sort of thing as well. You don't think so?
If a soldier stays at home, and that's what we'll see. They will just send drones to the war, not the soldier.
But Neil, the big advantage of this technology is your brain can be in one place and your body parts can be in another place. So as a soldier, your brain, as a soldier, you can be nice at home in Ohio or wherever it happens to be, but you can have fighting body parts in different countries. And if somebody blows up a particular bomb that is part of you, okay, might be a bit traumatic, but you're still okay back in Ohio.
There's been a radio series in this country and probably played around the world called What Makes Us Human. This is what makes us not human, isn't it?
I mean, yes and no. I think that, and I'll speak from my own experience, I had a magnet implanted in my finger that made me feel vibrations when I came into contact with electromagnetic energy. And I then had all of a sudden a new sense. I could feel something new. I could feel electricity, which is something that humans maybe are not supposed to feel. But then I thought, why not? Why aren't we supposed to feel that? And the fact that I could feel it, I ruminated on it, I told my friends about it, I did party tricks with the magnet, people laughed at it. It became the most human thing. It integrated seamlessly with the rest of my human existence.
Okay, but there could be exploitation. Massimo, let me put this to you. There's a man who was at one time in charge of the American program to develop this for the military called DARPA, Michael Goldblatt, and he was asked, could there be unintended consequences? And he said, well, yes, humans can be controlled for nefarious ends, insisting there are unintended consequences for everything.
Of course. So I don't think there is any reason in principle why we should or should not do certain things. I think that we need to talk about individual examples, case by case. So let's talk about, for instance, the case of telepathy, right? First of all, a really horrible idea. I don't want people to read my thoughts. We're talking about an incredible amount of invasion of privacy. We are concerned here about the NSA listening to this conversation. And now we're talking about actually somebody getting into my brain and directly my sensation. That seems to me like a perfectly bad idea. Please don't count me on as a volunteer. Now, of course, if other people want to do it, go ahead. But you're absolutely right. That also opens the possibility to military exploitation and misuse. Once that technology is available, I guarantee you the first ones to have it and to use it will be, in fact, governments and the military. And you can easily imagine, it doesn't take a genius of spy thrillers to imagine really awful things happening as a result. Another example that was brought up a minute ago was this idea of disembodying, in some sense, soldiers. So I had your brain and your biological body nicely sitting in Ohio, essentially playing video games with a real body made of metal or whatever, fighting your battle somewhere else. To some extent, of course, we can already do that. I mean, that's what drone warfare is about. But there's been a lot of ethical issues about even just the level of warfare, because what that does, it turns killing people into a video game. You do have that kind of experience. You don't feel anything. There's no danger to you personally. And war is already a pretty awful thing. I hope we all agree on that one. If we make it even more inhuman than it already is, and so it turns into a video game, are we really sure that's a good idea?
I'm going to go around all four of you now, and starting with you, Neil, and ask you a similar question. Is this the end of emotions? Because we know what we're told makes the world go round, and that is mystery. It is love, and you're taking the mystery out of life if you do this, aren't you, Neil?
No, the more senses you have, the more you can perceive nature, so the more you can sense.
Kevin Warwick here in the studio, and Alex, we'll come to you for a final thought in just a moment. You're taking something essentially human away, in your eyes, enhancing our abilities.
It's taking what we are as humans, which is pretty cool anyway, but then taking it further, saying, well, we're all right as being a human, that's fine, but, well, it's getting a bit boring now. Let's go further. Let's have more sensory input, more means of communication. So we're taking our humanity and putting it on the table. It is going to change us, sure, because we're going to merge much more with the technology, and hence our emotions will change to some extent. Certainly our ethical standpoint, the values that we have, all of those things will be mixed. If you and I can communicate just by thinking to each other, and some human comes and starts shouting at us with, what is these stupid noises that this person is making?
It's called language, and it can be beautiful.
It is
it can be beautiful.
A pathetic way of communicating in comparison with thought.
We've gone too far to put the genie back in the bottle, I think is what we've all decided at this table.
I think that's true.
But I mean, is that a good or a bad thing?
I mean, it depends on how you use it. And intent is always the most important, but methodology is equally as important. So if you are going forward with these kinds of technological enhancements and your intent is good, right? You want to help people, you want to help yourself, you want to do it for fun, it's not out of malice, and then also the way that you're doing it is above board, it's transparent, it's accessible to other people who want it, and then you can help them get it. I think that those are positive things and that there's nothing wrong with that. Now, when it comes to corporate or government control over these kinds of technologies, over people and their bodies and their thoughts, then that obviously, whether it's about human enhancing technology or it's about your cell phone or it's about your emails or it's about your democracy, then of course that's always going to be a negative thing. And intent always matters.
Thank you all very, very much indeed. So one of the questions, are we standing on the cusp of a new post-biological era for humanity? And where do we draw the line between fusing technology and our bodies? This has been Roundtable. From me, David Foster, and the rest of the team, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.